Seattle's wokest and most ignorant columnist, she's back at it. Her target, Israel. Welcome to the Jason Rand Show, presented by None Better Tax Resolution. This week, Seattle Times columnist Naomi Ishizaki emerged from some anti-racist training seminar to remind us how truly awful she is, both as a person and a columnist. Like so many on the radical left, she decided to use MLK Day to spew her anti-Semitism because, God forbid, a progressive let a black man have any moment. In an aggressively partisan anti-Semitic column titled, "This MLK Day, I Have to Speak Out on Gaza," she blames Israel for the Hamas terrorist attack that resulted in over 1,200 innocent Jews being murdered, kidnapped, or raped. Though you wouldn't know that from the article, she doesn't mention the rape. Of course not. To the radical left, it just didn't happen. That lie lets them get away with suddenly abandoning women. She offers exactly one sentence to the terrorist attack on October 7th. The rest of this really lengthy diatribe is to explain why Jews got what was coming. She writes that, quote, "Any honest accounting of the war that followed, the Hamas attack, cannot start the clock on October 7th. Oh, really? While pretending to provide context, she offers context-free claims from the Hamas perspective. No mention about Hamas being elected, Gazans celebrating October 7th, or Palestinians rejecting offers for an actual two-state solution. It's just that Israel provided a crushing blockade. She forgets, of course, to mention that without Israeli forces monitoring the border, they'd have had, well, probably thousands of October 7ths by now. No mention that Hamas's very existence is centered around an end to Israel, which would be justification enough for a war against Hamas, but Israel only responds after being attacked. Apparently that goes too far for Naomi Ishizaki and her fellow supposedly pro-Palestinian activists who end up carrying water for Hamas, and they know it. She notes that the deaths of journalists covering the war against Hamas are tragic. She mourns their deaths. What she doesn't tell you is that many of those journalists are Hamas-embedded mouthpieces. Some others were actually fighting for Hamas or embedded with the terrorists, though she never calls Hamas a terrorist group. Here's an example. Mohammed Jamal Sobi al-Talathini was killed most recently, January 11th. All the info we have about his death comes from Hamas-affiliated news outlets, probably because he worked for a Hamas broadcaster, Al-Quds. The same is true for Jabbar Abu Hadras, Mohammed And Ahmed Kadir, Mohammed Al-If, and so many more. Weird she didn't mention any of that. But her entire column is full of intentional omissions. When your goal is to demonize the Jews waging a war against an existential threat, you pretty much have to. Ishizaki writes, "The dehumanization of Palestinians have been so successful that those in Gaza are being blamed for their own slaughter." How ironic. She's quite literally doing that to Jews. Maybe she'd see us as more human if she saw what Hamas did to over 1,200 victims. You see, she was invited to a screening of footage from the terrorist attacks. And of course, she didn't attend. She might not want to see the end result of what she's been justifying from Hamas. God forbid that. Jason Rand's here with Greg Nunn, your local tax expert and advocate. Greg, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, Jason, great to be with you again and talk about these tax issues.
So some folks out there have the IRS calling them nonstop or even coming to their door. What do you recommend they do?
You are protected by statute, by law, that when you have representation, they have to deal with your representative. And I am acting in your best interest when I'm dealing with the IRS. And I tell you, you don't want to talk to them, it'll just stress you out.
If you're having trouble with the IRS, then call Greg Nunn. Greg might be able to negotiate a settlement for up to 85% off the original amount owed, and that includes penalties and interest. Call Greg Nunn today. Did you like that commentary? Make sure you subscribe to the podcast of The Jason Rand Show. Get it at ktth.com or wherever it is you download your podcasts.